Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and call to order our City of Placa, Florida Historic Preservation Board meeting of January 4th, 2024. Our invocation today will be led by Mr. Sheffield.
Of all of those who would watch, and Father, especially for those on this panel, that we would be sensitive to hear from our fellow citizens and from you on these matters. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Before we sit, our Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Timothy Jefferson.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, may we please have the roll call?
Certainly. Mr. Beaton?
Here.
Mr. Hollister?
Present.
Mr. Jefferson?
Present.
Ms. Pierce? Present. Ms. Vogt? Present. Mr. Sheffield?
Present.
Chair Van Rensburg?
Present.
All members and president accounted for. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. As we move into our, continuing with our call of order, I would like to, for one, appreciate and welcome the fact that we have Sherry Farmer with us today. Sherry is a fairly new member of the City of Palaca, and I believe she is a Planner 1. Thank you for being with us today, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Yes, ma'am. Moving into item D of our call to order, the appeal procedures and ex parte communication. We'll begin with the appeal procedure, which is any person wishing to appeal any decision made by the Historic Preservation Board with respect to any matter considered at such meeting will need a record of the proceedings, and for such purpose may need to ensure that a verbatim record of the proceedings is made, which record includes the testimony and evidence upon which the appeal is to be based. Florida Statute 286.0105. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, ex parte communication, please. I do have one thing that I would like to mention. This regards staff's recommendations to us regarding St. Mark's Church and possible scenarios that they might embark upon regarding their application, I would suppose is the way to say it. One of the things that staff recommended as a possibility was that if someone wished to purchase the property that they hope to demolish, it might be a possibility. I had the opportunity to meet with a nice young couple who moved to the area fairly recently. They asked me if I perhaps knew of any property in the North Historic District that might possibly be available, and I suggested that they contact a few homeowners that I knew of personally that were thinking of selling, and they might wish to contact St. Mark's Church. That is all I have. Moving on to item E, appoint chair and vice chair for the year 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, what are your thoughts?
Say we keep it as is right now.
Go for that too. I agree. I would make a motion for that.
All right, Mr. Hollister, I believe that was your idea. Would you like to make the motion, and perhaps Ms. Vogt would second?
I make a motion that we keep things as is right now.
And I'll second it.
Mr. Sheffield, are you happy with that responsibility continuing, sir? Excellent. We have a motion and a second to leave the board makeup the way it is with regard to chair and vice chair. Is there discussion amongst the board? If not, Madam City Clerk, perhaps we call the roll.
Call the roll, or you think it would be unanimous? We can just take an all in favor, say aye.
All right. Well, I don't want to be like overly confident about the entire thing, but,
Mr. Beaton,
Yes.
Mr. Hollister,
Yes.
Mr. Jefferson,
Yes.
Ms. Pierce,
Yes.
Ms. Vogt,
Yes.
Mr. Sheffield,
Yes.
Chair Van Rensburg.
yes.
Okay, I was waiting
Well,
for a nay.
I was gonna say present, but then I thought, you know what?
Motion passed unanimously, Madam Chair, and Mr. Sheffield, congratulations.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe given another year, I could, yeah, remember everything. Okay, moving on to our agenda item number 2, the approval of minutes from the December 7th, 2023 meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, any comments, suggestions, corrections? If not, let's look for a motion to approve as written.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Sheffield. Thank you, Mr. Hollister, pardon me. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, public comments, which we know the speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and we do not take action on items. Opening up the floor to public comments. If you would. Thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind your name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Tarsha Givens. My address is 225 Stillwell Avenue here in Palatka. I want to say Happy New Year to everyone. Madam Chair, last year, I want to say maybe it was at the October meeting. I'm not really sure. I have to look back at the records, but I presented information or asked questions in regards to Historic Center Academy located at 1207 Washington Street. And I believe you said that you were in favor of its restoration or something of that nature, but I wanted to ask a question to the entire board. Since this is the Historic Preservation Board, I mentioned about having that district expanded as far as the historic area. I was wondering if any of you on the board are currently interested in working towards efforts for restoring Historic Center Academy. I know it's outside of your historic district as far as the CRA, but I was wondering what efforts or what can be done as far as expanding the district, and also as each individual that's on the board, I would like to know who's in favor for helping to restore Center Academy as far as moving forward towards getting those efforts done. I'd just like to know who's interested in, because I think historic preservation should be for everyone, and it is a historical place here in Palatka, and I'm just curious to know who's on board.
Thank you. I believe that possibly the very definition of no action taken on items would be for us to say a yay or nay, specifically and individually, if we were willing to move forward on a project or not. I would have to look back to the records of our meeting at the time to see if I said something specifically one way or the other.
Mhm.
Wow, that's a tough one, because you would like for us to kind of comment on something that we're unprepared to comment on. So what I would do,
Can I make a comment?
oh, absolutely.
In our capacity, as board members, here, we cannot
Mhm.
really comment, give a yay, nay, thumbs up. What I would recommend that you speak with us individually in our capacity as citizens, because there may be some guidance or help that we could provide along the way, but in our official capacity here,
Mhm.
unless an application or other stuff is brought before us, we can't really speak to it.
Okay.
But come to us individually and see how we may. Okay.
Okay, any suggestions other than does anyone else have any suggestions, if I may add?
I believe what we always like to suggest is work closely with city staff and see if you can find a way to come before us in a more official capacity on our agenda.
Okay,
And then at that point, we would be absolutely glad to talk about whatever you would like to talk about.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Allegra Kitchens, 1027 South 12th Street, Palatka, Florida. I just want to wish you all a very happy new year, but most of all, I want to give you a heartfelt thanks from me as a former commissioner, as a citizen of Palatka. You have made some very hard decisions this year. You have made the right decisions. You have been given heck for it, but stand strong this coming year, and I hope it'll be a little bit less eventful than last year. But again, I want to give you a big heartfelt thank you. You all have done everything right, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kitchens. Yes, ma'am. If you would, please, your name and address for the record.
Hi, Rebecca Bigenwald, 211 South 7th Street, Historical District. I just presented photos. Out my dining room window, I see a huge camper every day. I've called the city commission. I've made calls to the owner, and it still sits. It's an eyesore. And I don't believe that the historical district should have a camper sitting in someone's front yard. And I don't know where else to go for help.
I can address this. The city currently is working on a vehicle storage ordinance. Unfortunately, we are in a policy moratorium until we have a new city manager in place, but we do have an ordinance, a draft ordinance teed up for discussion by the planning board. There could be potential code violations here, so I would suggest contacting code enforcement. But that ordinance is not adopted yet by the city council or city commission.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. West. Thank you, Ms. Rebecca. Anyone else for public comment? If not, we'll go ahead and close the public comments. Moving on to item 4 of our agenda, our regular business. Item A, HPB case 2318, a certificate of appropriateness request to add a new fence around the perimeter of the subject property. The owner is TP Schoolhouse LLC. The address is 200 South 7th Street, Palatka, Florida. The parcel number is included. Let's begin with city staff, Ms. Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the commission, the board. This request is to add a new fence around the perimeter of the subject property to comply with certain state of Florida child care safety standards and provide increased property security. You have heard this before, so I will be probably more brief than usual, if that's possible. I won't go into the background of the historic properties of the historic characteristics of the property, but on this document, beneath on the page that's on the screen, you can see the photograph is the subject building, and the proposed alteration is on the next sheet, where they would like to add a black vinyl coated chain link fence around the perimeter of the property. The fence will be no higher than 4 feet in the front of the building facing South 7th Street and no higher than 6 feet on the remaining sides. The exhibits show the proposed location as shown in the Xed lines around the perimeter of the property in the document on the screen. And then on figure 4 on the next page shows an example of the proposed fence material. The Historic Preservation Board reviewed this case on October 5th, 2023. The board voted unanimously to accept city staff's recommendation to approve the certificate of appropriateness. There was an appeal that was heard on the city, heard by the city commission on December 14th, after the appellant disputed the Historic Preservation Board's October decision. The commission voted unanimously to push this matter back to the Historic Preservation Board. Staff's recommendation remains the same as far as an approval for the certificate of approval as requested. And I can answer any further questions, but I'd also like to direct your attention to our city attorney who has some comments to make.
Thank
So
you.
I have, thank you, Lisa. In preparation for this, and I just want to make it clear that this case is a little bit more complicated than your typical issuance of a certificate of appropriateness because you have a daycare facility which invokes several other regulations. So you're looking not only at city code, but federal guidelines, and then also the Florida Department of Education guidelines. And none of the latter two came into play at the initial recommendation by staff. And so what has happened is we have the city commission has asked this to be remanded back to this board, and they have explicitly asked for you to take into consideration the standards of the Secretary of Interior Standards of Rehabilitation, SISR. So, you know, the federal government likes to have acronyms for everything. So what I have done is I've taken the liberty of basically providing a checklist to help guide your conversation on this particular discussion item. This is simply meant to be a tool because you're looking at 4 different applicable laws, codes, and guidelines. The first one is the criteria set forth in our own code, section 54-79, the Secretary of Interior Standards for Treatment of Historic Properties, the Florida Department of Children and Family Child Care Facility requirements, and lastly, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission, which has the Florida state requirements for educational facilities regarding security. So those last 2 are definitely not criteria that this board is accustomed to reviewing. So to help guide you in this process, I have a detailed checklist with the criteria description that I have pulled from each of those applicable places. And then just to help facilitate, has the criteria been met, yes or no? And this is simply meant as a tool and a guideline as you work your way through this process. And I hope it's helpful. And with that, I'll hand it over to the applicant to make their presentation.
Hello, I'm the applicant and I wrote up a couple of pages to let everybody know what's been going on over the last 2 years during my ownership at the building. So anyway, I wrote it all up so that I don't
And
forget
bef-
anything.
Before you begin, if you would please name and address.
Right. John Vanderwerf, 618 River Street, Palatka, Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderwerf.
So I wanted to start out by saying my wife and I are the owners of the property located at 200 South 7th Street. It's locally known as the Campbell Building. Property is currently being leased by the Community Development Coalition Corporation for use by the Little Sprouts Learning Center and the newly forming Putnam Classical Academy. In 2024, the academy will accommodate children through 3rd grade. My wife and I purchased the Campbell Building just over 2 years ago so that we could play a role in its preservation. At that time, the property was owned by the Edge School and was in serious need of additional renovations. The Edge School didn't have the funds necessary to make the needed improvements or to even repay the personal loans for the improvements that had already been made. So as a means of financing the renovations, it made sense for my wife and I to buy the property and lease it back to the Edge School at a very beneficial below market rental rate. The original plan was for the Edge School to buy the property back anytime after the initial 36-month lease period. Unfortunately, the Edge School lost its state charter due to the fact that it was operating as a dropout prevention school while they were still chartered as a STEM school, and it was an unfortunate situation for them and for the community. In any case, my wife and I found ourselves in the unfortunate situation of owning a very large historic school building that didn't have a school. And then by incredible coincidence, my good friend Colin Bingham was helping Risa Bird to form a new pre-K school, and they needed a building. So the rest is history. Little Sprouts opened 12 months ago and currently has an enrollment of over 100 students. Next year, the school will expand to educate children through 3rd grade. It's a wonderful success story for the people of Palatka. In order for the school to grow, it's imperative that the school is secure, and a security fence is actually mandated by law. And Risa and Colin can give additional explanation on that subject. So this part, I was saying, I must admit I take offense when comments are made that we're trying to do something on the cheap to cut corners and to save money. And I know that didn't come from anyone here, but For some background, the purchase price of the building based on the then current appraisal amount was $1.2 million. We spent an additional $250,000 in 2022 and another $200,000 in 2023. And we expect that it will take another $400,000 to $500,000 to complete the renovations on the second floor. That will put the total investment cost at over $2 million to preserve a Palatka landmark and create a top-notch learning environment for Palatka children. This week, the Palatka Daily News ran a story about the subject of our meeting that's being held tonight. The story incorrectly states that Mr. Green is a Palatka resident. Mr. Green does not live in Palatka. He does, however, own a commercial property on 114 South 3rd Street. The property is an eyesore with numerous code violations, including a non-compliant wooden fence that was constructed even after Mr. Green was told that it wasn't allowed. If Mr. Green really cared about the South Historic District, one would think that he would abide by city codes and take care of his own place. It appears to me that this whole process is Mr. Green's way of causing a problem for other people. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to tell our story, and I hope that we can keep things moving forward for the Campbell Building. It's my understanding that the Historic Preservation Board has latitude in making these decisions and that state guidelines are flexible, not absolute. In addition, city code does not prohibit chain link fences, and we over there at the school have no plans to modify the exterior of the building itself. I did provide some photographs, Sunny has them, of showing a black Exhibit A, shows a picture of a black chain link fence over at the Island Doctors location on St. John's Avenue. And I wrote, although the black chain link material is more expensive than silver galvanized material, it looks much nicer, and that's our choice of materials. So it's that.
Madam
So-
Chair, I'm not really sure how to show them all three at one time. May I just flip through? Thank you. This is Exhibit 1. Let me know when you're ready. This is Exhibit 2.
So that's the decorative fence at Tavares High School. And I was going to say, it's not particularly attractive. And a specific note, there's a lot of vandalism at the bottom where people have kicked in the hollow metal uprights. So that something like that is not going to work well for us, especially with small children. And then the last picture is just a picture, there were several pictures of the issues at 114 South 3rd Street. So I guess it's kind of neither here nor there, but it's just take a little offense that somebody's picking on us. But anyway, that's it. That's all I had to say. That's what we're doing. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. Before you go, do we have any initial questions for Mr. Vanderwerf? Mr. Beaton?
Madam Chair, let me ask staff, first of all, is there a copy of our October minutes in this packet today? Or not? Maybe I just missed it, or
They're
maybe
not,
it's
I
not.
can certainly print them. I didn't prepare the packet, Mr. Beaton.
Okay, do you have access to those?
Mhm.
So, and I think you'll probably recall, I mentioned at the October meeting about the possibility of breaking up the straight fence along Laurel Street with perhaps some little alcoves where you could do some plantings of smaller plants that wouldn't obstruct view of children that were in that area.
Right.
Is
And I
that
think
some-
that's the key, Larry, is that if it doesn't obstruct, I know there's some codes and guidelines, but if it's not creating a hazard, then I think as far as an expense, we have no problem.
Okay, so could I ask staff if that's something that we want to happen, does that need to be in the motion today? That modification, because obviously, other than me saying something about that, it doesn't appear anywhere else.
Right, yes, so you do need to provide in the motion any conditions to the issuance of the certificate of appropriateness need to be explicitly stated within the motion and have that seconded and approved.
So I guess the follow-up question would be, so you don't have a problem with taking a look at doing something like that?
Not at all. No,
Okay,
no problem.
all right. And so would we need something to look at prior to approval of that, or just stating that in a general way?
No, you don't have to have a full-blown site plan or landscaping plan, but you do need to be specific with your guidance. So if you're going to have landscaping criteria I would encourage you to be as specific as possible as to what part of the property that should apply to. You know, what kind of vegetation is as detailed as you can get, I think would be preferable here, given the contortions this case has taken over the last couple of months. If I'd like it to be as detailed as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure, of course. Anybody else?
Thank you. Do we have other questions for Mr. Vanderwerf at this time? Thank you very much. We might ask that you come back and visit with us if we come up with something else to chat about.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you. At this stage, I believe we would open to public comment.
Hi, Cheryl Roach, 312 Dodge Street. I live very close to the building. I don't quite understand the hoopla about it. I think you need to choose your battles wisely in our community and especially in the historic districts. This should be first and foremost about security for the students. Aesthetics is important, of course, but I think that there's nothing wrong with having a chain link fence surrounding that property whatsoever. I walk by every day. The new gates are not offensive to me. I know personally, I will admit that I used to go through that parking lot before they put up the barriers to, well, not the gates, just the cones. I would try to be respectful, but that area is regularly abused by cars, and the traffic is seriously over the speed limit and reckless on a regular basis. So I don't quite understand why we're even arguing about a moot point. This is not Jacksonville. We don't want it to be Jacksonville, and it's not St. Augustine. So there are chain link fences all over the South Historic District, and I don't think most people are really offended by them. I don't think it's a cost-cutting way to deal with the situation whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Well, I will say that we did, as a board, step out of our area of sensitivity with regard to chain link fences in historic districts back in October, but I believe we did so with the idea in mind that this, I'm sorry, Ms. Kitchens, come on up. I get so excited sometimes. I forgot to close the public meeting. Public comment.
That's okay. I was watching. You can just add it to the card I filled out. Allegra Kitchens, 1027 South 12th Street, Palatka, Florida. First of all, if you all, or not you all, but they're talking about closing 7th Street where Krill Avenue hits it. If they close that, then all the traffic that currently comes down 7th Street between Krill Avenue, State Road 20, and Laurel Street, they're going to go down Krill Avenue and they're going to turn to the right. There's going to be more traffic down Laurel Street coming past Campbell School, which I'll call it Campbell School, Little Sprouts. So that chain link fence is very vital on Laurel Street with the anticipation of increased traffic. People that go down 7th Street currently off of Krill Avenue are going to go down to 7th Street. I know I will, and a bunch of other people are. So that's very critical. And I would think that the federal government guidelines on school safety would override the city's ordinance as well as the historical district ordinance. And then, of course, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. I would also add that this school is in the downtown business district as well as the Palatka Historic District. It overlaps. And while property is supposed to comply with the historic district, it's actually in the downtown business district. And those who pay taxes to the TIF, it goes into the downtown business district and not into the historic district. And that's been an ongoing thing. I'm not sure why those two districts overlap, but you might take that into consideration also. And like Ms. Roach said, there's lots of chain link fences and some of them silver chain link. I've driven past there and the black vinyl gates are up. They look great. I have no problem with it. And I agree with Mr. Vanderwerf. I think the applicant that appealed this, I think it's sour grapes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kitchens. At this point, I will go ahead and close public comments and then kind of go back to my original thought, which was largely we refrain from these type of fences, but I feel that we as a board understood the extenuating circumstances, which is why we made the decision to decide the way that we did. Direction from city staff or potentially Ms. West
Sure.
before we get into our own comments. One of my questions to you is, you were wonderful enough to bring this to us. Perhaps we could go through it together.
I think that's a good idea.
Thank you, ma'am.
And just to address Ms. Kitchens's comment, oh, that is a very close camera. I'm sending. Wow.
Is that better, Ms. West?
Redirect, I don't know.
Okay, it's on you, Madam Chair.
So, at any rate, I just briefly want to address how that we're dealing with local law, our code, right? State law and federal law. I think this is helpful because I think as you work through this list, you're not going to find that they conflict with each other. So as you work down the list, you're not going to see that somehow state is preempting local or that federal is preempting local. They all actually are saying kind of the same thing. You just need to work through the criteria to see if this application, meets these particular criteria, because that is what the city commission has tasked you to do with this remand. So you do need to do this exercise, and I think it's probably good that it take place in a discussion format as you work through them. Let me know how I can help.
And a motion still needs to be at the end, though.
Yes.
You can work through them together, but somebody's still got to make a motion that summarizes everything.
Fantastic. Ms. West, if you could talk about the criteria description and allow us to come to a conclusion on whether yes or no is.
Sure. So the first one is the City of Palaca Code, Section 54-79A. Your general considerations in reviewing an application for a certificate of appropriateness, the board shall, so this is not an optional language, shall consider the design and appearance of the structure, including the interior, front, sides, rear, and roof materials, textures and colors, and plot plan or site layout, including features such as walls, walks, terraces, plantings, accessory structures, signs, lights, awnings, canopies, and other appurtenances. So this is just general considerations of what you must do.
So that would be a yes.
Well, I believe we did that. And so, and if you're saying what we should mark here, I would say yes. The consideration for all of that was taken from what I believe. So.
Do you want to just keep moving through the list in this way where I read it out and you guys talk about it? Okay. The certificate of appropriateness shall be based on the conformance of the proposed work to the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, and that's in your code. So again, I emphasize shall. You must consider the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. Moving on. Will the proposed alteration materially impair the architectural or historic value of the structure? And this is pursuant to your code. We should discuss that and probably answer it. Do you want to have a discussion or do you want me to keep going?
Ladies, gentlemen, in my mind, it would not materially impair the architectural or historic value of the structure. Does anyone disagree?
I'm not saying I'm against it, but I don't think that in a perfect world, or if I could, I would want it to look more like an iron fence around that building. That would be what I would choose.
It doesn't, as far as my because I guess I ran a youth camp and a day camp at a school for 10 years in Detroit, and used to the licensing and all the what we had to have around the facilities for children. and what the applicant has proposed meets that. And so that was all in my mind as we were doing this. The challenge here is ideally, they're using the building from its exact historical use. No issue there, but we have a requirement for the safety and security of the children in the facilities, but you've got to have visibility here. The options in terms of the fencing. Now, I wouldn't have been in agreement with the gray. I'm glad they went with the black. That's the better look. But then for the rods and other stuff like that, the maintenance on that and the potential security and hurt of children squeezing through or doing other, you have to have the child safety here. And so yes, that's a long-winded answer to the conclusion I came to as to why I would say will it impair the architectural or historical value of the structure. There's a no right here on my paper for that. Okay.
If I could answer you back on that.
Yeah.
Mike, and I agree with you when you go over the entire appropriateness for wanting this, but in answer to that particular wording, does it impair or affect the historic value? That is why I have that issue. It has nothing to do with safety or anything else.
Mr. Beaton.
Could we go back to the second one? Could we get staff to tell us specifically in the Department of Interior's standards, what section that they felt like that did not eliminate the use of chain link fence as part of the Department of Interior standard? Could maybe you address that? It doesn't have to be exact, but just what made the city feel comfortable to make the recommendation as far as the Department of Interior standard?
I do have the next 4 items on your checklist pertain directly to the Secretary of Interior standards. So maybe we can discuss it and you can add at that point.
Thank you.
So the next one, does the proposal install, I'm sorry, was there any additional discussion on
Well,
the
no,
third?
if I can point out, Miss Lisa had provided us with that, and we had that she had brought that in for that meeting, for some meetings before on wood stuff and other stuff. And I think it's on page 112 or 120 of there that goes to that standard where it had the recommendation and what was not recommended. But you were covering it here in this next piece where the struggle was obtrusive, if I could, and that was really the judgmental call there. But that's where I saw it mentioning fences specifically in that section of the criteria for the.
And I do
from the
recall that. Unfortunately, this is the one where I was up in DC, so I was
yes,
attending
you were-
remotely.
you
So
were-
I do apologize, but I do remember a discussion about obtrusive. So I tried to detail that in this next one, which is, does the proposal install protective fencing, bollards, and stanchions in the setting when necessary for security that are as unobtrusive as possible? Obtrusive, and this is according to the department, fails to take into consideration the location and visibility so that they are negatively impact the historic character of the setting.
That was on page 68 of the standards. Yeah, yeah.
And this is also in your packet on this.
Yes.
Yeah. This page. No, you're right.
Because my other thing with this is that it actually states in here, when necessary for security, that are as I have a problem with this word, obtrusive as possible. And so it doesn't say if it's, no, it gives as possible in there. So that's where I mentioned the judgment, but I'll keep quiet. I don't do much of it.
Well, and I think that we also need to kind of take into consideration that it's the Secretary of the Interior standards of rehabilitation, guidelines. And I believe with any standard or guidelines comes extenuating circumstances, as we found in this case, where we need to make sure that we keep kids safe to the best of our ability while following the greater laws. In the case of the last question, does the proposal install things that are necessary for the security of the property as unobtrusively as possible? I would say yes. Ms. West, can we?
Move on?
Yes, ma'am.
Sure. A property shall be used for its historic purpose or be placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building and its site and environment.
So on that note, once a school, always a school.
Right. So the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided.
I believe.
Okay. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to the property, the historic integrity of the property, and its environment.
Ladies and gentlemen, thoughts?
Okay, now we're off of the Secretary of Interior standards and moving into the Florida Department of Children and Families Child Care Facility requirements, which you do also need to take into consideration as part of this particular, it's always case by case application. So does the outdoor, and these aren't necessarily incompatible either. Does the outdoor play area have adequate fencing or walls that are a minimum of 4 feet in height? Moving on, is the proposed fencing, including gates, continuous without any gaps or openings larger than 3.5 inches that would allow children to exit the outdoor play area? Does the proposed fencing provide for 2 exits?
I'm sorry, I didn't hit quick enough on the one prior to that,
Okay.
where it said, without any gaps or openings larger than 3.5 inches. Is that correct? No, thank you.
Does the proposed fencing provide for 2 exits? I believe the gates have already been installed for 2 exits. Moving on to the Florida Department of Education fencing criteria. All pre-K, kindergarten, and daycare areas shall be separated by fence that is minimum height of 4 feet. Moving on, for pre-K through grade 5 facilities, additional hazards shall be fenced, locked, and secured, including play fields that are adjacent to roadways. Moving on now to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission. These are more like school hardening for security. It's not explicit to fence guidelines, but they should be taken into consideration. Is the material non-flammable, durable, and low maintenance? Moving on, is the height of the fence in accordance with local zoning regulations? And finally, fencing should be used that does not permit footholds that would encourage climbing. Last one is correct. Thank you.
So if I could, ask either city staff or our city attorney to kind of give us an overview of how we got where we are today and what are we indeed ratifying our decision back in October to uphold what we, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Right. So in order to survive legal scrutiny, if this were to be taken up on an appeal, it would be a petition for writ of certiorari that would go to circuit court. They are going to look at the findings of fact and the conclusions of law that this board has come up with, which is why we just went through this detailed exercise. That would be the basis for the findings of fact. What you can't have is, and this is where we ran into some issues, the entire sentiment of safety of the children trumping all of the other criteria cannot be the basis for your finding of fact, because in my legal opinion, that would probably be overturned on appeal. So having gone through the exercise, you need to balance all of the factors, all of the criteria, both at the local, state, and federal level that you are required to do to make sure you've got adequate findings of fact to support your decision. You can't have one element trump everything else. So I don't think there's any dispute here that a fence is absolutely required for this facility. No one is arguing that. I think what the issue is does it comport with the Secretary of Interior standards? And I think you guys had that discussion the last time this came before you in October, and that's where you mentioned the landscaping. And there were other comments made that probably weren't supportive, like, oh, we don't usually do this in issuing permits for chain link fences. So that made it a little bit more of a tenuous finding. So as we move forward today, we want to make sure that we have this all sealed up with our findings of fact.
Mr. Sheffield.
Thank you. Considering, and thank you for providing the appellant's write-up and reviewing what's been brought and why this appeal was brought, and in walking through this criteria again from our local, state, federal level, and looking at the criteria we're as a board being held to a standard of, I go back and say again, really the thing that is for me overall, looking at everything that we just walked through, I still would move that this application be approved as stated with the use of this fence selected. I believe we've considered all the relevant criteria, not just on one single thing, and we've considered the issues brought by the person appealing this decision. And after giving consideration to that, I would move to approve it.
I'd like to hear what Larry has to say in reference to the aesthetics with the landscaping and stuff, and some of your ideas, Larry. I like what you had said about that.
So, okay, thank you. At the October meeting, what I was primarily thinking about, of course, I live 2 blocks from this location, so I'll see it every day. And when I look out my windows on that side, I see the school. So it's an unusual building to be in the historic districts. It's different from the majority of the buildings because of the nature of what it was and is. I went all 6 years, like Allegra talked about. I went all 6 years to Campbell School, so I knew the school well. I wasn't going to bring this up, but I am going to mention it because I don't have any facts to back this up. I looked for it between the last meeting and this meeting. There was a chain link fence on the Laurel Street side of this property when I went to school there to protect the children from the trains that were going by down the middle of Laurel Street. It was an aluminum colored chain link fence. And I know there's other people in Palatka that remember it because a couple of people have mentioned it to me. I just don't have a photograph that I was able to bring today. So it's not the first time that there's been consideration for protection of children that are on this property by a fence, and obviously not as attractive a fence as the owner is proposing here. I do think, because it is such a visible building, that there should be a little bit of consideration given for landscaping that could be mixed in with the fencing, especially on the Laurel Street side, because that's probably the most visible side from the majority of the traffic that travels through that area. And I'm not a landscape architect, nor does my yard look very landscaped, but I do think that someone who does that for a living could take a look at that and find some vegetation, something obviously easy to maintain that would not grow to a large tree or a large bush that could be maintained in such a way that it's going to not obstruct visibility of children that would be in the area where the vegetation is. So I don't have anything in mind as far as what that vegetation would be, but I think number one, that the owner and the people there would want something that would be easy to maintain, and probably a native vegetation if possible that could be kept under control so it's not presenting a problem. I'm not as concerned about that on the west side, the ball field side, because we already have, that kind of is covered as far as appearances. And then the only other side you have is our lady who lives on 7th Street and on the Oak Street side of the property. And I just don't think that's as significant an appearance to the passing public as the Laurel Street side is. So that's the only side that I'm in particular concerned about. So that's about the best I can do to describe that. But yeah, I got a couple of phone calls, and it did about the fact that there used to be a chain link fence at that school, and that would have been in the late 50s, early 60s. And then when it became the district school board office, they removed that fence and paved the playground and made it a parking lot.
Thank you, Mr. Beaton. I totally agree with your comments regarding landscaping on that side of the property. In my personal opinion, is it would be lovely to have something that continued up 7th Street and around the corners, just to kind of give it a little bit of matchy, which I don't think is the official term. Cohesiveness. Thank you, Ms. Vogt. Other thoughts from our board members? Are we in a position to make a motion, Ms. West?
So let's try and get this as detailed as possible. We've mentioned landscaping. Do you want that in front of the fence or behind the fence? And if you could explicitly state in your motion which streets. Mr. Beaton stated just Laurel, but I've heard for the sake of continuity to include 7th Oak. I believe the west side is a parking lot, so that wouldn't make sense. So in stating your motion, if you could be as explicit as possible.
Madam Chair, I would, should we?
Hold on
we-
1 second, Mr. Beaton, if you would. Mr. Sheffield?
I would think the vegetation would be outside. I wouldn't want it inside the fence where the children are going to travel and run all over it. So, but I'm fine with everything otherwise.
Thank you.
But there is a little section
Mhm.
when you go down 7th and then you turn on Oak right there from the corner of 7th, right where these is to the brewing is, there's a small section before the parking lot that should be included as well, in my opinion.
Thank you, Ms. Vogt. Mr. Beaton?
I don't have any strong feelings about which side of the fence the vegetation should go on, but I don't have any children either, so I would yield to whatever would work better. I had suggested go outside the fence just because it wouldn't be something that the kids would get into and maybe have an allergy to whatever the plant was or some weed that's growing up. But from a, I think it would look fine either way. But if you did like a few little alcoves to the fence where you kind of came in a little bit and did the plantings on the outside, and I don't have a particular number in mind. I'm just thinking you're talking about pretty much a city block on which would be I haven't measured that block, but probably approximately 300 feet would be the distance we're talking about. So if you did that on the Laurel Street side and South 7th Street side, and however much distance before you run into parking lot on the Oak Street side, which is considerably less, I would say, what is there?
160.
One-
and then 84.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
As we continue to discuss, would it be possible, would it be within our purview to ask Mr. Vanderwerf if these things that we're talking about regarding landscaping are a good compromise, a good fit in his estimation? Would you mind if you would, just so we,
Colin wanted to speak specifically, if it's all right, about what we might be able to do with the fence line and some planters on the outside. He's perfect.
Perfect. Colin Bingham, 113 Marina Road in Placa. We have no problem with what you're asking for. The only concessions before you make the motion is that we can't have the planting on the outside of the fence because people can climb, it aids them to climb the fence. So we're okay with having the plantings on the inside, and we'll deal with allergies and all that kind of stuff. And we also have irrigation to deal with. So we'd like to have it on the inside, and obviously it can't be high enough to be obtrusive. So other than that, and if there's any other additions you want to make to it, if I may add something, if logistically it won't work for us. But again, we have no problem with adding plantings.
thank you so much. Mr. Jefferson,
Do you have an idea of what plantings you have in mind already?
So yes, we looked at all xerotrophic, so we don't have to put irrigation out as far out to the ball field as we wanted to do. We had an arborist come in. John brought the arborist in to look at the trees. So we're going to clean all the trees up that are there. And then he had suggestions for plantings. Off the top of my head, I do not know what they are, but he was on the same page that we were going to run it along the areas, not where the parking lot was. We didn't have to break up the asphalt, but along the grass side. Risa, do you know the number off the top of your head of how high DCF or DOE will allow us to go?
The statement is that it just can't be anything that somebody can get a foothold. So if it's a sturdy enough planting, it can't be a planter, it can't be anything that someone could stand on and get out. For the kids, even if they stood on the 6-foot side fence, it's not gonna be an issue with them climbing over. But it can't be like a tree that a child could scale up and then get over the fence. It would have to be just lower.
thank you. And before we continue, Ms. Bird, if you wouldn't mind, come on up and just give us your name and address for the record. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Sorry. Risa Bird, 7949 Washington Avenue, Hastings, and I'm the owner of Little Sprouts Learning Center.
Thank you. Lady, yes, sir.
So a couple of the suggestions we had were some type of pampas grass that had the color of all, but if you stepped on it or a child stepped on it, it would compress and rather than give them the lift to get up. So, and Risa also has plantings for vegetables and stuff with the kids. So there's going to be colors sporadically throughout the west side of the parking lot, but like behind the ball diamond. So it's going to be nice. You have my word on that.
Mr.
And
Jefferson.
this photo shows a sidewalk. Is there a sidewalk around the whole?
There's a sidewalk around the whole perimeter of the building, yes, sir. And there's also where the ramps go up to the front of the school in front of this lady's house on 7th Street. There's areas for planting in there, and there are bushes in there that are just kind of aged bushings in that picture right there. So we're going to add some mulch to that. We'll add color going up the ramp. So the front of the building will be brought back to life. But right now, I obviously didn't want to put a ton of money into it because people can just walk up and steal the plants out of the planting. So, and it's happened. So.
Thank you very much for the clarification, and thank you for working with us. We do appreciate that. Ladies, gentlemen, our thoughts moving toward a conclusion?
We need to discuss our checklist.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was under the impression we kind of did that as we moved through it. Would anybody like to further clarify, Mr. Jefferson? If you have something to add, please.
No, I think that it's all yes, except for the one no. So that that means that on all four of these governmental agencies, it would work.
Ms. West?
So that's not my decision. I lay out
Well,
the
we-
rules.
Are we on the right track?
Well, we had two new. We had, on the first page, will the proposed alteration materially impair?
Where's the second?
We had a no, and then I thought, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down. Is the proposed fencing, including gates, continuous without, oh, no, I'm sorry. Without gaps, yeah, it is without gaps, okay, yes. So there's no second one, so we do have,
Bunch of yes.
I'll accept that.
Ms. Vogt?
I think we're probably ready to make a decision if I'm not wrong.
Please be as detailed as possible in your motion.
I'm hesitant to make it because I'll make sure I make it correctly. I would, let's say.
Wait, I'm sorry. Let me finish reading that, because I was wondering, why did I mark that no then? It says, is the proposed fence, look at this with me so I don't get this, including gates continuous without any gaps or openings larger than 3.5 inches, that would allow children to exit the outdoor play area. And I'm saying, no, it's not larger than that gap, and it wouldn't allow them.
Right.
That's what,
I asked, it is not.
yes.
So it's continuous when the gates are closed. So you might have, so the children are allowed to exit obviously through the parking lot, and we'll have other gate openings. But once it's encapsulated and all the gates are closed, the children cannot get out. There's no gaps bigger than 3.5 inches.
Yeah, right, okay.
Thank you for that clarification. Ladies and gentlemen, who would like to move us forward with a motion, a detailed one?
One other consideration is the proposed fence, I believe it is in the plans, along the perimeter, or is it set back?
It's inside the perimeter of the fence line enough for the concrete post. So it'll be about 6 inches inside the sidewalk line. Ms. Pierce, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So you're coming in 6 inches off the sidewalk
Towards the building,
towards the building
Correct.
within the perimeter or within the property?
within our site and
Okay.
property lines, yes.
Okay.
And Ms. West, that's within our ordinance or guidelines for fencing and stuff for the sidewalk, or Ms. Walsh, excuse me.
After you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Vogt. Our code says that it cannot be obstructive also in the manner of a sight triangle. So if you're driving, if you extend your fence all the way to the exact point of a corner and you're blocking someone's view, if they're sitting at a stop sign in a vehicle, then you should move your fence back a little bit or angle it so that it doesn't block the view. So that could also be a consideration at the corners.
It is within the discretion of the board to have the fence pushed back further away from the sidewalk to maintain that line of sight for vehicles. That's in your discretion. You need to work it into the motion.
If I can clarify that too, on the only corner that's a direct corner or direct 90-degree turn would be on 7th and Oak. And we've set that back so that it comes back, I think 15 feet. So we're not blocking that in any way. And then there's a fire suppression system that comes closer to the sidewalk that the fire chief wanted us to stay as far away as we could. That means pushing it back towards the sidewalk more. So we have made those concessions that we should be all covered.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beaton?
Madam Chair, I'll make the first attempt. Okay, I'd like to move that the board accept staff recommendations for the approval of a certificate of appropriateness for HPB 23-18, 200 South 7th Street, for the proposed improvements that have been listed by the applicant, that the board has reviewed in detail the criteria for approval of the fence, both in reviewing information from City Code, Department of Interior Standards, and Florida Department of Children and Family Services requirements, that the applicant has agreed to do landscaping and plantings that would not affect the security of the fencing by being low and not an ability to climb upon to breach the fence, and that those plantings take place on 3 sides of the building, that being Laurel Street, South 200 block of South 7th Street, and Oak Street. Anything else? Does that about cover it?
All right, a second. Oh,
Just a note of clarification, if I may, Madam Chair. Laurel Street, Turner Block of South 7th Street, and Oak Street before the parking lot?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, I'll correct that. Only the first, do we know what that, approximately how?
There is no grass on Oak side.
It's that many, 151 feet.
Approximately 150 feet of the section of Oak Street that is closest to South 7th Street.
Please.
Motion by Mr. Beaton. The board accepts staff's recommendation for the approval of a certificate of appropriateness for Historic Preservation Board 2318 200 South 7th Street for the proposed improvements that have been listed by the applicant. That the board reviewed in detail the criteria for approval of the fence, both in reviewing information from City Code, Department of Interior Standards, and the Florida Department of Children and Family Services requirements. That the applicant has agreed to do landscaping and plantings that would not affect the security of the fencing by being low and climb upon to reach the fence. That those plantings take place on 3 sides of the building, Laurel, 200 block of South 7th Street, and Oak Street, before the parking lot, approximately 150 feet, the section of Oak Street that's closest to South 7th Street.
Is it appropriate for me to? No.
Sorry about that. We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Ms. Vogt. Discussion amongst the board. I believe we are at a stage where we need to go ahead and call for a vote, please, Madam City Clerk.
Switching from my mic button, I was looking over there, sorry. Mr. Beaton.
Yes.
Mr. Hollister.
Yes.
Mr. Jefferson.
Yes.
Ms. Pierce.
Yes.
Ms. Vogt.
Yes.
Mr. Sheffield.
yes.
Chair Van Rensburg.
Yes,
Motion passed unanimously.
thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, moving along in our regular business to item B, Historic Preservation Board's duties under the City of Palaca Code, section 54 through 78. Who would like to address us?
Okay. So, this agenda item emerged after a discussion between Chair Van Rensburg and myself about the opportunities that are available to this particular board. You guys have been tasked with doing a lot of the hard work that you did today, just kind of listening to these applications for certificate of appropriateness, but the code actually provides for a lot more that you can do, and that perhaps you'd like to have a discussion about taking on some additional roles that are allowable under the code. So the very last page in your packet is a regurgitation of the section of the code that is applicable here, section 54-76. And you have a list of 18 different items. But some of these, for example, number 3, develop programs to stimulate public interest in urban neighborhood conservation and participate in the adaptation of existing codes, explore and advise property owners concerning funding and grant sources that might be available. So you've got a lot of things that you can work with here. It's a well-written part of the code, and I just felt like, along with Chair Rensburg, that it might be appropriate, Van Rensburg, excuse me, Chair, that it might be appropriate for a discussion item. So that's why it's on your agenda. Mull it over, talk about it now, table it. I view this as more of an ongoing consideration.
Thank you so much, Ms. West. My suggestion would be that we take a look at the list, think about it on our own accord, and then revisit it next month. How does everyone feel about that opportunity? All right, I believe I would be looking for a motion to,
Chairman Rensburg?
oh, sorry. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Of course, coming from a clerk perspective, the planning department typically makes your agendas. But as a general rule of thumb, if there's something to come before you on an agenda, I would ask that you give your planning department at least 2 weeks notice prior to it being on the agenda.
Thank you very much. My suggestion was going to be, before I recognize Mr. Beaton, that we ask that it come back to us at our next meeting.
I meant typically, if any of these come, like say you want to talk about grants and like, not the next meeting, but like maybe a year from now, you want to take up grants as your thing, then
Oh,
2
okay.
weeks prior to that meeting, please let staff know. So that
Absolutely.
they can prepare the agenda item.
So we can't say we'd like to talk about grants and can you be ready in 5 minutes? Noted. Thank you very much. Mr. Beaton.
I just wanted to comment quickly that number one on this list, recommend to the city commission by means of designation reports, the establishment of historic districts and sites kind of lends itself to what our person spoke about under public comment about Central Academy. So it's within our purview to develop something that we feel like would be acceptable to the city commission to either do it as a district or as an individual site. I did find out very recently that there is already an historic marker for Central Academy that was not put up because of concerns about vandalism, but there is one of the physical state markers. And if you look through the markers for Putnam County, it's listed on there as a marker at that site. So that's something that, I think we could move forward with, since that's a pretty high profile item, in the community. But there are certainly other areas, and we don't normally consider it under our purview because it's a state-owned facility, but the Ravine Gardens is a historic district and with the state of Florida, but they pretty much take care of themselves, and the city has never really gotten involved in doing things related to what the state's doing on that property. But that is a designated historic district.
Thank you, Mr. Beaton. Ladies, gentlemen, what do we think about the potential to table these thoughts while we roll them around and think about them and talk again at the next meeting? If so, I believe we would need a motion to table.
I make a motion to table these items until the next meeting.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. Or no, we don't have a second, pardon me. Do we have a second? Thank you, Mr. Hollister. All in favor, please say aye. And opposed. All right, we will talk about this again in February.
Okay, so for purposes of the agenda, just put it as a placeholder discussion opportunities for historic, just big.
If you would.
No problem.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Beaton.
I want to apologize to the chair because you sent me a draft of something we were going to have ready for this meeting about granite curbing, and it got put on the back burner as far as some projects I was working on, but I'll try to have that ready for the next meeting also, so we can present that about the curbing.
Thank you, Mr. Beaton. I was definitely taking into consideration the holidays, and I figured it would come back around. Okay, moving on to staff comments. Ms. Walsh?
We expect to have a draft brochure for the historic district that we talked about several months ago. It got sidetracked a little bit over the last couple months, but Right, so
Thank
it's forthcoming. Right?
We actually had that discussion this afternoon briefly. So good things are coming our way. Moving on to board comments. Ladies, gentlemen, anything else you'd like to offer?
Training videos, Madam Chair.
Oh, I'm
Just
sorry.
remember your training videos. If anybody has anything. they wanna
Remember the training
discuss,
videos.
Let us know.
Absolutely. We're all gonna go straight home. I'm sorry, were there any comments amongst the board? Mr. Sheffield?
Did I recall we were going to also put on a future agenda, because there were some recommendations that came out of the, what study was done? What was the name of the, or
Oh, master.
the
site.
master site? And we were going to look at, discuss those and also consider where would we be on recommending additional. Was
Right,
that
those, there were recommendations made in that the update for the cultural resources survey. And the main ones concerned looking at expanding existing districts and or creating new ones. And those are the things that are following directly under what Ms. West had just brought to you. So items for discussion.
Thank you. Does that answer? Excellent. All right, ladies, gentlemen, if you would care to do so, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Thank you. And